Welcome to Wall Street Confidential. I'm Aaron Task here with Jim Cramer. And Jim, we've talked on and off about ETFs in various segments, and I've heard you say some things that make me wonder if you think that they are not a great vehicle for the individual investor. You said
I think ETFs are part of the corrupt process that I've seen all my career on Wall Street, which is that if you can create product. I remember when I was a young pup at Goldman Sachs, and the goal was to create as much product as possible. The product conundrum is that unless you continue to do new product, there's really no way to make enough money off of old product. So you invent new baskets, you invent new derivatives. This is a case where the commissions are really driving the invention. It's important to, at all times, have no play lip service to what the consumer wants. I think that having been in the business of creating a lot of product when I was at Goldman and having been the leader in product creation in my sales group, that I recognized that I did far better than everyone else in commission because I created a lot of product. So, I mean, it's certainly what spurs things. Now, why doesn't it get talked about it like that? Well, who in his right mind would ever admit that? Why do I admit it? Because I play for TheStreet.com. But it really is just a case where it doesn't do the consumer any good at all. I would emphasize the reason why it doesn't do the consumer any good at all is that the only free lunch is diversification. It's anti-diversification.
Well, how is it anti-diversification if you are indeed buying a basket of stocks?
Well, you're all buying them in one thing. You're buying them in one sector. Now, sector's 50 to 55% of what a stock does. So when you're clustered in sectors, you're defeating the purpose of having many different sectors. So you might just say, listen, I want to be in a sector fund, which is an ETF, and therefore I'm safe because it diversify within the ETF. That's the same as my saying, listen, I want to be in 5 different kinds of companies. I want to be in Microsoft for software. I want to be in Marvell for semiconductors. I want to be in Hewlett-Packard for PCs. I want to be in CA because it does enterprise software, and I want to be in Merck. It's just downright stupid. But again, no one's willing to call the emperor naked. But you have to, because you have to recognize that it isn't like you sit around at these brokerage houses and say, how can I help the public? Right. I've never heard that phrase in my history of Wall Street.
Well, this is something I know you've written about in the past, and it doesn't get talked about a lot, but for the people who maybe are new to this, is that Wall Street, they're selling merchandise, and these are the products that they sell. They're just like any other sales organization.
Right. It's important to have up years. It's important when you make your budget to try to figure out what you could sell new. And I think that it's not ripping off the consumer. What it is saying, listen, here's the deal. We are in sales. We're like Saks, okay? At Saks, we're trying to get you to buy more expensive product.
Right,
you
and then
may
in the
be
spring
a shrewd
season,
observer.
you want to buy the spring season, the fall season, you want to say the fall season
So
close.
it's the same thing as all businesses. It comes off as being something that is perceived to be better for the consumer. I would rather have it be like Saks, where you just say, listen, this is really expensive. Does it do you any good than the cheaper stuff? No, but it's stylistic. I think that way, at least, there would be a modicum of honesty, but there really isn't a lot of honesty in the system.
Right. Well, and the reason I asked you this was a somewhat different take on it is that I've heard you say the individual investor is overmatched in the OIH and that hedge funds are now using the ETFs as the way to...
Well, I'd like to talk about that for a second. There's a perception created by people who I think have never watched my TV show that I'm pro-trading. The show is obviously so anti-trading, it's kind of preposterous. That's why I say people haven't watched the show. And one of the reasons why I'm anti-trading is because you just can't keep up with the manipulations of an OIH. You can't keep up with the manipulations of natural gas. What's incredible is that people don't step back and realize that this is the deal. Natural gas futures, it's conceivably a deep market, were completely manipulated by one hedge fund. So why would we think that the OIH isn't completely manipulated by a couple of hedge funds? When people hear the word manipulation, they immediately think, well, it can't be manipulated because if it was, the government would step in. Right. That presumes a level of sophistication of which the government is just totally incapable of doing. So, if you think that there's really a vast conspiracy to move the OIH, you're right.
Well, I've heard you say similar things many times in the past. Has anyone from the government ever come to you and say, Jim, help us figure this out?
Yeah, a bunch of times. And for the most part, the FBI's come to me a bunch of times. Justice Department's come to me a bunch of times. The SEC's come to me a bunch of times. But in the end, it really is a question of here's our thesis, and you're going to support it. They don't come in, with the exception of the California the commission investigating Enron, which was actually open-minded enough to use me as a regular source for the manipulation, taking off energy from the California grid. Most of the time, the government has the thesis, and because it's the government. Well, not I have to. It's not a the way the government works is I'm in America, and I can't afford to not buttress whatever theory they want.
Right. Okay. And just to try to wrap this up, so. Should individual investors avoid ETFs? I mean, should that be part of the portfolio?
I mean, they shouldn't. And then if you want to build a portfolio of ETFs, you're just in a mutual fund. One of the raps, again, another rap against me is, well, it'd just be much easier to go buy an index fund, which is completely and utterly preposterous given the empirical nature of the returns that I've been generating on my show. You could argue that in ActionAlertsPlus.com, you have to do what I say before I do, which is giving you much better performance than what I do. But, ETFs don't make any sense. Now, why don't people talk about that? Well, the press is as unsophisticated as the government, and the people who propound the theory get a lot of money, and that's almost every brokerage house.
Right, and the press will say, ETFs, it's the same as owning a mutual fund, except it's, the fees are lower, so you're better off.
Right, and I think it's important to point out that the press has swallowed the line too. Diversification is the only thing that has over time worked. So the idea of being anti-diversified is just something that has historically cost people a lot more money. I'm very worried about downside. I always say upside takes care of itself. And ETF are part of the downside, not part of the upside.
Okay, Jim, thanks very much. I'm Aaron Task. Stay tuned for more of TheStreet.com TV.